So they say that money is the root of all evil. And when we follow money to its roots, that is government issued or what we call fiat money, paper currency, we do find that deep down it is a very rigged and corrupt system, one that fuels or perpetuates many of humanity's greatest crises or pending crises. For most of human history, we've had no viable alternatives. But what if we could fix the money? And what if that is the necessary catalyst for greater systemic change? So I'm just curious to take a little poll of the audience, show of hands. How many people here got into Bitcoin or got curious about Bitcoin for ideological or philosophical reasons? A couple people. Yeah, I found tends to be the case for people who got in kind of earlier, and later it's gotten different kinds of hype for different kinds of reasons. But also, how many people here think a whole new monetary system might be necessary for us to affect any real change? Okay, yeah, great. You're on board with me there. How many people are skeptical that even a new monetary system is going to save us at this point? Yeah. Some doomsdayers, cool. Anyway, that's why I'm here today, to talk about the real value of Bitcoin, not just the price or the profit potential, but the possibility that it represents. So I'm Phoenyx, and I've spent over 20 years since I majored in global economic systems in college and worked for the World Bank, asking the question, how can we create systems that serve people and planet versus power? I first heard about Bitcoin during Occupy Wall Street in 2011, and honestly, I didn't get it at all. I thought it was some kind of weird video game money. But over time, I realized that this isn't just a new kind of money. It's a new foundation of possibility, one that could unlock new ways of living and relating. By 2014, I was so inspired that I started teaching about Bitcoin. And it's been a really challenging journey to help people grasp the real value of this new innovation. And one of the most common confusions that I still hear is, how can a currency that's purely digital and that's not backed by anything have any real value? How can it be worth anything? So today I want to talk about why more and more people are rushing to trade dollars for Bitcoins, and why the price of the Bitcoin is just the tip of the iceberg, the aspect of its value that we can easily see. But there's far more going on beneath the surface. But first, let's talk about money. So this might sound like a simple question, but I'm curious who can raise their hand and answer this. What is money, really? How about you? Yeah. It's a great response. Yeah, something we expect to hold value into the future, right? It's like, yeah. Anybody else want to comment? Yeah.
Some means of exchange.
Right, a way we communicate value to each other. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Yes, an instrument of debt. Totally true for fiat, absolutely. So who decides what money is worth? Anybody got an answer to that question? Yeah, back. People? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another way we term that in economics is it's determined by supply and demand. You know, what are people willing to give you in exchange for money or gold or Bitcoin? And why do we trust money? Crickets? It is a broad concept, yeah. Yeah, maybe an easier question to ask, huh? Well, I would argue that we've been taught to trust money because we need a reliable way to exchange value, as you said, and we need something that holds value into the future, as you said. But when that money is printed without limit, with no backing beyond government promises, that trust gets violated. Inflation, as we can probably all feel right now, is literally robbing us of our time, our labor, our purchasing power, and therefore our future. But every government-issued currency is inflationary by design, meaning that governments have the right to print more and more and more of it. And eventually, this is how currencies die. If we look at the historical record, every government-issued currency has experienced the same fate. Basically, greed compels people who have the power to print money to keep printing money. And the more you print money, the less valuable it becomes until the currency dies of hyperinflation. So, Bitcoin is the first money that breaks that cycle. It offers a way out, a monetary system that no one can dilute, manipulate, or print more of. So, unlike dollars, which is backed by debt, promises, guns, Bitcoin is backed by math, energy, and global consensus. That's not just a change in infrastructure, that's a transformation of trust. Bitcoin gives us a foundation to build with, one that supports less censorship and more privacy, less war and more cooperation, less exploitation and more empowerment and sovereignty. And I want to show you how. Unfortunately, we are facing cascading threats as a species: war, mass surveillance, ecological destruction, resource exhaustion, even population collapse in some regions. It can feel like the world is unraveling from all sides. But if we follow the money, we often find a common thread: short-term profit incentives, centralized control, and systems that reward extraction instead of stewardship. This is what fiat money fuels. And money shapes our priorities. It shapes our politics, and therefore our possibilities. So let's take a look at some of the crises that are created and or perpetuated by fiat and government currencies. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly, but you can follow my project Bitcoin for a Better World if you want to see more real-world examples of how Bitcoin is shifting things. First up, we have endless money printing and hyperinflation, which we just mentioned a moment ago. So what's the problem? Central banks devalue your savings by printing more money. National currencies then collapse under runaway inflation. Thankfully, Bitcoin fixes this. How does Bitcoin fix this? Bitcoin has a hard cap. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins in existence. And that security, or that scarcity, provides a global hedge against local currency failure. Real-world example of this: in the US, the money supply has surged 40% in 3 years, which has drastically eroded our purchasing power and will continue to do so. In many other parts of the world, they're experiencing much worse hyperinflation. For example, in Argentina and Venezuela, people have been turning to Bitcoin to protect their savings, and that's beginning to happen here as well. Next up, we have censorship, especially of financial activism. Bitcoin fixes this too. Protesters, activists, and regimes are people who regimes want to oppress for any reason. Could be your religion, your ethnicity, your gender, can be debanked. And we've seen this happen all over the world. How does Bitcoin fix this? Well, Bitcoin allows anyone to send or receive money without permission. So this provides an opportunity for protesters like the Canadian truckers in the recent protests they experienced when their bank accounts were frozen, or WikiLeaks, or Edward Snowden, or Chinese pro-democracy groups, even organizations like Wikipedia, to rely on Bitcoin as a way to keep funding their activism. Another issue we see that's very common is remittance exploitation. Bitcoin fixes this too. Sending money across borders can cost people up to 30% in fees. If you've never had to send money across a border, you're lucky. But there are a lot of people who are trying to support their families across the world, and this is just eating away at tons of that money. Bitcoin enables fast and very low fee, comparatively, direct transfers across borders. And families across the world are using Bitcoin to bypass Western Union and their exploitative fees. The surveillance economy. Bitcoin addresses this as well. So we probably are realizing more and more all of our financial activity, as well as our internet activity in general, is being tracked and also sold and potentially weaponized against us. Bitcoin, thankfully, gives us some opportunities to keep our financial transactions more private and pseudonymous, and offers a lot of other tools that we can enhance our privacy with, unlike central bank digital currencies or credit cards that will track your every move. This is already happening in the world, especially in areas with authoritarian governments where journalists need to use Bitcoin to avoid government surveillance. Next up, we have war funded by inflation. So did you know that most war is actually not funded by taxpayer dollars? It's funded by money that's printed on the spot for that purpose. So Bitcoin fixes this. Governments, if they can print endless money, can wage endless war, and they don't need the consent of the people to wage those wars. Bitcoin removes that option by separating money from state. As an example, the US printed trillions of dollars to fund wars that the people never voted for, like Vietnam, Iraq, and Ukraine. And Bitcoin, in contrast, cannot be printed for bombs. Another major issue we see is lack of access to the global financial system, global economics system, and financial oppression. Bitcoin addresses this in a big way. Right now, there are over 1.4 billion people with a B that have no access to a bank, which means they have no way to easily transmit funds across distances, across borders, or to participate in the global economy. That could be because of, paperwork, it could be because of discrimination, it could sometimes just be because of distance from the nearest banking establishment. But Bitcoin is accessible to anyone that has a phone and an internet connection, regardless of their identity or their location. And this is already making a huge difference for people in remote areas of Africa, as well as with regard to financial oppression. Women in Afghanistan under the Taliban regime had no right to own any property whatsoever, but Bitcoin has allowed them to get an education and to earn money and to have some independence in an otherwise very oppressive regime. Next up, we have debt slavery. So the fiat system incentivizes debt and punishes savings, right? Because if you save money in a currency that's devaluing all the time, then you're better off spending it sooner than later. Bitcoin is the exact opposite. It actually rewards long-term thinking and responsible savings, because if you know that the Bitcoin you hold now is going to be worth more next week, next month, or next year, you're going to think a little harder about whether you really need that new toy and potentially consider saving more instead. We have a real crisis on our hands with debt in this country and in the world, which starts for most people from early adulthood. But again, in countries like Venezuela, they're dealing with hyperdebt crises, and Bitcoin is used as their life raft from those situations. Another issue is no accountability. So we have seen this, over and over. This is part of what was in the first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, was addressing the corruption that came out of the 2008 financial crisis. Corrupt institutions can print and mismanage money and then just get bailed out. The rules just get rewritten for them. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is governed by math, not by politicians or CEOs. So instead of, getting golden parachutes, there's no way people can bail out bad actors with Bitcoin. It replaces corrupt human fallibility with infallible math. And finally, fiat is doomed. Thankfully, Bitcoin's here to address this too. As I mentioned before, every fiat currency in history has eventually failed due to unchecked inflation and greed. But Bitcoin removes the power to print money. Its supply is fixed, transparent, and incorruptible. From the Roman denarius to the Venezuelan bolivar, fiat currencies have been collapsing and continue to collapse into the present day. Bitcoin's rules haven't changed in 15 years and can't be rewritten by a vote or executive order. So it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of all these challenges, but changing the rules of money changes what's possible. When we fix the money, we fix the incentives, we protect people, and we create new opportunities. So we've seen how broken money distorts the world, but how exactly does Bitcoin offer a better foundation? Let's look beneath the surface at the properties that make Bitcoin the most powerful form of money that humans have ever created. First of all, it's finite supply and scarcity. So where fiat money is designed to be inflated, Bitcoin is the opposite. Its total supply will never exceed 21 million, which protects your time, your labor, and your savings. This also limits the ability of states to fund endless wars or to spend recklessly by taking away their money printer. Decentralization. There is no CEO of Bitcoin. There is no central bank. There is no central server. So this means it's pretty invulnerable to governments or other cabals who might want to come together and take it out. It's secured by tens of thousands of independent nodes, which means computers and people all over the world, not necessarily by guns or government power. Censorship resistance. In a world of frozen accounts and politicized payments, Bitcoin is economic free speech. It lets people support causes without asking for permission. No third party can block, freeze, or reverse a transaction. There's no gatekeepers, just freedom. Global access and mobility. Once again, you don't need a bank to use Bitcoin. You don't need permission, paperwork, you don't even need an ID. If you have a smartphone and internet access, you're in. The fact that Bitcoin is borderless means that people can send cheaper, faster, and fairer remittances, and that allows families to send money with almost zero fees, no middlemen, and no borders. Energy demands. So this piece is quite controversial, I find, but I really want to point out here that it's far less than fiat currency. Despite the alarmist headlines, Bitcoin uses considerably less energy than the banking system, just in this country alone, the data centers, or the military-industrial complex that all prop up the US dollar. And that's not to mention all of the central banks and all the other things that support all the other fiat currency in the world. Another thing that's really important that I bring a lot of attention to in my project, Bitcoin for a Better World, is that a growing share of Bitcoin's energy usage is actually coming from renewable sources or wasted energy, stranded energy that would otherwise go unused. A lot of mining is getting established in places like dams where excess energy coming from the flowing water cannot be sent to the grid and it cannot be stored in any other kind of battery. So it's to the advantage of miners to locate their setups in places where the energy is free, because then the overhead costs are reduced so that they can make more profit. And finally, regarding energy, Bitcoin's energy usage is not a bug, and that's something that's been a bit controversial as other things have come along. It really is a feature. It's by design, because it anchors truth to something that the real world can't fake. physics. Another thing that brings a lot of value to Bitcoin is its auditability, transparency in a world of deceit. So every transaction on the Bitcoin network is public, permanent, and auditable by anyone at any time, even though we don't have our names associated with our transactions on the blockchain. There's still a lot of auditability that's possible that is not with the US dollar and how that system works. There are no accounting black boxes, no backroom deals. Bitcoin is governed by math, not lobbyists. It's an open source, verifiable system, and once the rules are set, no one gets to rewrite them behind closed doors. And finally, permissionlessness, inclusion without gatekeepers. Bitcoin doesn't have to beg. It doesn't have to protest. It's simply existing, available for anyone to use at any time. There are no applications to fill out, no approval processes, and this really matters for all of us, but for some people in the world, it's the difference between freedom and control, or even the difference between life and death. So Bitcoin is not just a financial technology, it's a resilience technology built for these uncertain times. But now I want to encourage us to think broadly about what all of this makes possible. So imagine with me for a little bit the bigger vision of this question: what if we don't need perpetual growth? So fiat money is debt-based money, as someone mentioned earlier, and debt-based money has one rule: grow or die. It demands perpetual expansion, more production, more consumption, more extraction, more people, even on a finite planet. And that kind of growth just isn't sustainable anymore, and it's becoming quite destructive in a number of ways. But now I invite you to imagine a very different kind of system, a deflationary system. And this is one where value increases over time, where savings is rewarded, where innovation lowers costs, and where we don't have to run faster just to stay in place. Combine that with exponential technological progress, and we start to ask a new kind of question: what becomes possible when we're no longer slaves to growth? Maybe it looks like more time, more rest, more freedom, more creativity, more regeneration, more localized resilience, and more global connection. Fewer strip malls and more forests, fewer burnt-out workers and more sovereign individuals. For most of human history, our systems have pitted us against one another for power, for resources, for survival. But Bitcoin invites us to imagine something different. Not a revolution of blood and fire, but a transformation, quiet, voluntary, and unstoppable. We don't have to fight the old system. We just have to stop feeding it. Bucky said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Bitcoin is one such model, not because it promises more of the same, but because it ends the addiction to infinite growth. Imagine no inflation, no war funded by invisible debt, no pressure to extract, consume, and expand just to keep the machine running. Bitcoin opens the door to a post-growth economy, one rooted in truth, cooperation, and sufficiency. It doesn't need your hustle. It rewards your patience. And that changes not just what we value, but what we can build. That's a true paradigm shift. So, in closing, Bitcoin isn't just an investment, it's an invitation to opt out, to build differently, to believe again. Storing your value in Bitcoin is voting for a better system and a better world. You're opting into a system that's fairer, freer, and more aligned with our shared values, and you're supporting the building of new systems, not just profiting from the old one. Fixing the money won't fix everything, but it is the first stepping stone. It helps us imagine a world where freedom, transparency, and trust are baked into the foundations. When money no longer rewards corruption, extraction, and war, everything starts to shift. Bitcoin's true value isn't its market cap. It's the freedom it protects, the trust it rebuilds, and the new systems it makes possible. You don't need to be technical. You don't need to be rich. You just need to care. Start learning, start stacking, start building. And if you'd like, follow my project Bitcoin for a Better World, and let's imagine and build something worth believing in. Thanks. So we have about 10 minutes for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Where are you based?
Portland. Yep. Yep, I started doing meetups and workshops here back in 2014. Slowed down through the COVID times and picking back up again gradually.
Did you just start picking back up, or?
Yeah, in the last year or so. Yeah.
Beautiful presentation.
Thank you. In the back?
Yeah, so Portland is definitely known for arts, and one of the things that I think most excites me about Bitcoin is the ability to help usher in a potential for, I don't know, an honesty in the arts again, so that the arts don't necessarily have to be a commercial product to be worth creating. And I was wondering, so I come from the video game industry, which is just brutal.
Uh-huh.
And I like video games for what they can be, but they were invented the same time that we went off the gold standard. So, I think it's an interesting thought experiment to think about what modern art could be under, I don't know, a hard money kind of standard. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts or resources or people that you've seen talk about that before or anything like that.
I love that angle, and I feel like I just barely touched on it by mentioning creativity as part of this vision for a new paradigm. But absolutely, this pressure to, keep running on the hamster wheel has really cheapened so much, including art. Like, we just have to produce more, produce faster, try to cater to the consumer, and, it's much less about just feeling into like a deeper creative spirit. Unfortunately, I don't know of any like groups or resources that are specifically focusing on that. But I'm a visual artist myself, and would definitely love to network with such a group if they were around. So yeah, thanks for bringing that. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear basically kind of how you orange pill people. If you walk up and talk to someone, because we're all in this room, and I think probably most people here have kind of considered the questions you brought up already, like what is money? And I really appreciate your answer, which was thinking about money being tied to something real, which would be great. It's not the world we live in, right? I think most of us here have kind of gone through the matrix. We see it from the other side. But I'm just curious to hear, like, when you meet someone and you maybe tell them what you do, or like an elevator pitch of Bitcoin and looking at the world differently, how do you do that?
That's a great question. And actually, it totally depends. After trying to teach about Bitcoin to many different audiences for over a decade now, I've realized that people take an interest in it for lots of different reasons, and it has a lot to do with their background and their goals, and it also matters a lot where they're coming from in terms of their education. So my degree's in global economic systems, as I mentioned, and so I was able to to find my way to Bitcoin's magic through understanding the economic potential of it. But I find that unfortunately I can't use that same enthusiasm to reach most people who really couldn't care less about economics. It's been challenging, and it's something that I'm still aspiring to figure out how to reach more women, especially, and marginalized groups that are not part of the dominant, tech bro paradigm, because it's tricky, and I've had to just listen more, actually, to what people really care about, and then go from there. Yeah.
So I personally get very excited about the philosophical and the Christian case for Bitcoin.
Uh-huh.
But what I found is that I feel like you mentioned global economics. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it seems to be that adoption would come from the most marginalized people around the world. Yet when I talk to people, the most often thing they'll say is, "I don't have any money to put in Bitcoin." So how do you talk to people that like that say, I can't afford to buy Bitcoin?
Yeah, my typical approach for that is to say, like, we all have a little bit of expendable income. People blow $5 here and $5 there on coffee or treats and that kind of thing. And I encourage people to just consider it one of those little things. Like, if you can swing $5 a week or even $5 a month, you won't regret it. And I think as soon as people get off zero, as soon as they have a little bit and they start to see the value grow, they start to get more curious, they start to go down the rabbit hole a little bit more, and then they start to realize, like, oh, actually, it's not some like luxury good that is out of my reach and that I can't afford. It's an opportunity for me to grow my wealth. It's an opportunity for me to participate in a different system. And that's the point that I get really excited when people finally reach. But sometimes it takes them having just a tiny bit and realizing that they can just buy $5 worth to get them off of that train of thought. Yeah. Yeah.
So for anyone in the room, or maybe people that we know, just getting into blockchain, Bitcoin, and they want to start their journey for a better world, what would be the 3 things that you'd recommend that they could do today that would help them in that journey?
Let's see. I would say, number one, reach for the kind of education that resonates with them the most. So for some people like books. I love books. That's where I get a lot of value. Some people love YouTube videos instead. Some people want to learn in person at a meetup, for example. So whatever their inclination is, the best way they learn, to seek out that opportunity to educate themselves, to carve out time, 1 hour a week or something like that you're going to study Bitcoin, because that awareness accumulates and builds enthusiasm for further learning. Number 2, I guess I would say get some Bitcoin, even if it's just a tiny little bit. Learn how to use a mobile wallet and learn how to check the value of it, because once you have ownership, it changes the game. And third, I would say network with community. That's one thing that has been challenging for me over the years as one of the only women in the space in a lot of the spaces I found myself in. I really felt like an outsider for a long time, and that it was difficult for me to really connect to a lot of people around me in the community. But ultimately, I think that community is really, really important. And now there's more and more diversity of people getting into the space, and we can all learn a lot from each other, and we can support each other, we can troubleshoot with each other, and I think that's all really important. Yeah. Yeah.
So for example, MicroStrategy, what do they hold? Almost 700,000 Bitcoin now. 700,000, I mean, we're getting close to a million, and that's 1/21st of the available amount of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So as you're seeing treasuries form and centralization form that can ultimately create a centralized system that can control the markets and just create a bigger problem than what we're projecting right now with fiat currency. The vision of Bitcoin, beautiful, but where are we headed? And is there some sort of protection against the centralization? I mean, anyway.
Yeah. I think that's a great question, and I noticed somewhere on the agenda today there's a talk covering threats to Bitcoin, and I hope that they'll address that more thoroughly than I can in my short time frame here. Yeah, personally speaking, I certainly hoped to see more Bitcoin distributed in more hands, especially across, developing nations, before we saw this, race of institutional investors to gobble up as much as they possibly can. But here we are. We have arrived at institutional adoption, and thankfully, Bitcoin is pretty distributed across the world at this point. It's true that, MicroStrategy has got quite a stockpile going, but they're also holding it on behalf of investors. Granted, the fact that they're still holding it in one centralized place poses a certain risk, but it's not as if it's one single owner. It's, as you said, a treasury, and people are able to own shares of that. I am not of the mind that that consolidation is going to equal Bitcoin being co-opted or controlled. Owning a large share of Bitcoin is not the same thing as being able to control the network, or rewrite the rules. So I do think that anything that becomes as successful as we all hoped Bitcoin would become will get to the point where it gets the attention of rich people who decide they want their share of it. And because they have so much available capital, they can claim quite a large share of it. But I think it's, I still am just encouraging everybody to get their share of it. Whatever the wealth is in your possession, that is your opportunity to claim your share of the finite Bitcoin pie. Another risk I'll touch on briefly is that wherever Bitcoin is consolidated in one place becomes a honeypot, a target for attack. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we're going to start seeing some major losses as some of these big stockpiles accumulate, which actually ultimately kind of helps the network in an odd way, even though it's hard on the people who might lose it. But the more scarce Bitcoin is, the more valuable it is. And because it's so divisible, I don't really worry about, there not being enough to go around. I think we're just going to be operating in Satoshi denominations far more than Bitcoin denominations moving forward. All right, that's my time. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to my talk.